What's up, house groups? So this week I read a story about Nikita Khrushchev, who took over as the premier of the Soviet Union after the death of Joseph Stalin. And he very publicly denounced Stalin's atrocities and many of his policies and attempted to kind of reform the country. But during the early years of his leadership, he was at a public meeting criticizing Stalin when a heckler shouted out, "You were one of Stalin's colleagues. If you really believe what you're saying, why didn't you stop him?" And Khrushchev paused and roared, "Who said that?" And suddenly the room went deafeningly silent. For a long time, everyone froze. No one dared to move a muscle. And then Khrushchev calmly looked down and quietly said, "Now you know why." Like, fear has a lot of power over us, even when we know what we ought to be doing. I said this on Sunday, and I'll say it again. In life, unless we learn to fight fear, our fears become our fences. We've been talking for the last few weeks about Elijah and how God continually called him to do bold, risky things. Things where he had to trust God would show up or he would have been dead. And he kept stepping into them because he learned on repeat, when we go where God guides, God always provides. Always. The catch, though, is we gotta go. And that's the part that hangs most of us up. It's the part that hangs me up. We're afraid to go because we're vulnerable. And fear is tied from the very beginning of the human story with Adam and Eve to our vulnerability. And also to our ability to look ahead and imagine the worst possible outcomes. So fear holds us back from the lives God says we were made for and the dreams God has placed inside our hearts. And my guess is every single one of us has been in that spot. And all of us right now have some things God is tugging at our hearts to do that fear is attempting to fence us in and keep us from doing. You know, one of my favorite parts of Elijah's story that we talked about this week is the introduction of Obadiah, who defied King Ahab and Queen Jezebel by worshiping God and saving his prophets that they were trying to murder. And he did it, according to 1 Kings 18, because he feared God greatly. He feared God greatly, which I think means he was less afraid of what might happen in his life if he did what God called him to, than he was afraid of what wouldn't happen in his world if he didn't obey God. Like, he was so in awe of who God is and how God moves that he lived with spiritual FOMO. He didn't want to miss out, and he didn't want the world to miss out either. And my prayer for all of us is that we would cultivate that kind of spiritual FOMO in our lives, the kind that causes us to live and move boldly, even when fear, or when our vulnerability and when our imagination gives us hundreds of reasons to hold back. Because I believe God wants to do world-changing, future-shaping things in and through our lives. And they won't always be what we thought or what we expected, but he will always move. And so this week, let's trust that our God really is bigger than our fears. Because if we do, if we live with spiritual FOMO and we go where he tells us to go, what we're going to see is his faithfulness on the other side.